Lucas was a 14-year-old boy living in a quiet neighborhood, known for its tree-lined streets and the serene afternoons, broken only by the sound of children playing or the murmured conversations of neighbors. It was a place of apparent harmony, but also of judging glances and words that rarely broke through the barriers of politeness. Intelligent and curious, Lucas observed this world attentively, but didn't yet fully grasp its nuances. Raised by his mother, Mrs. Cist, he had absorbed many of her values, though deep down he was beginning to question them. Mrs. Cist was a practical, meticulous, and extremely protective woman. Raised in a conservative environment, she firmly believed in maintaining appearances and preserving what she considered good relations within her social circle. Although she didn't express it openly, her actions and words often revealed prejudices that seemed natural to her, but were becoming noticeable to Lucas. Despite this, Mrs. Cist deeply loved Lucas and did everything she could to provide him with the best opportunities. At school, Lucas was a dedicated and discreet student. He didn't have many close friends, preferring the company of books and video games. That's why his connection with Caleb was so unexpected. Caleb was a black boy, the same age as Lucas, with a shy smile and an observant gaze. Creative and polite, Caleb had a natural charm that attracted attention without effort, but he avoided the spotlight. Few knew much about his life outside school, except that he came from an upper-class family, something he never made a point of highlighting. Their paths crossed during a science class. The teacher paired them for a project on renewable energy, and at first, they approached the task with formality. But over the weeks, they began to get to know each other better. They discovered they shared a love for video games, particularly adventure and strategy games, and for comic books. Caleb enjoyed drawing and had notebooks full of impressive sketches, while Lucas was fascinated by creating scripts and imagining elaborate stories. This combination made them a natural duo, both in their schoolwork and in their conversations and jokes. Over time, Lucas and Caleb's friendship grew. They spent their breaks playing soccer, discussing new games they wanted to try, and exchanging books and comics. Lucas admired Caleb's calmness and creativity, while Caleb appreciated Lucas's curiosity and enthusiasm. But despite their closeness, there was an unspoken boundary in their friendship. Lucas had never invited Caleb to his house. It wasn't that he didn't want to. Deep down, Lucas knew his hesitation had to do with how his mother might react. The idea of inviting Caleb came up casually during a school break. They were sitting on the bleachers by the soccer field, watching others play, when Caleb commented, "You talk so much about your PlayStation that I'm starting to think it's a one-of-a-kind model." Lucas laughed. "It's just a PS4. My dad gave it to me before moving abroad. It's kind of my only distraction at home." Caleb smiled, but his gaze seemed distant. "I've never played on a PlayStation. I've always been curious, but my dad never cared about those things. He thinks video games are pointless." Lucas was surprised. "Really? Dude, you've got to come over sometime. We'll play together, and you'll see how awesome it is." Caleb nodded, and the conversation shifted. But that night, back at home, Lucas began to seriously consider the invitation. He liked the idea of sharing something meaningful to him with Caleb, but he couldn't ignore the discomfort he felt at imagining how his mother might react. "Caleb, your school friend, he's new around here, isn't he?" Mrs. Cist asked during dinner, as she cut small pieces of meat for Lucas's plate. "Yeah, he started this year," Lucas replied, trying to sound casual. "He's a cool guy. We're working together on a science project." Mrs. Cist nodded, but didn't seem too interested in the subject. "And his family? Do you know where they're from?" "Not much. He just said his dad works at some big company. I think they moved because of his job." Mrs. Cist murmured something in approval, but Lucas noticed a slight furrow in her brow. He knew that look well. It was the kind of curiosity she had when deciding whether someone was trustworthy. Lucas felt uncomfortable but chose to ignore it. The next day, Lucas finally gathered the courage to invite Caleb to his house. Caleb readily accepted, and Lucas spent the rest of the day trying to hide his anxiety. He knew his mother would ask questions, perhaps even make comments, but he hoped the visit would go smoothly. When Caleb arrived, he was greeted with a polite smile by Mrs. Cynthia. "You must be Caleb," she said, studying him closely. "Welcome to our home." "Thank you, ma'am," Caleb replied, as polite as always. Lucas led Caleb to the living room, where the PlayStation was ready to use. They spent the first few hours playing and chatting, but Lucas couldn't ignore the fact that his mother occasionally walked by the living room, glancing at them. He knew something was bothering her, but he couldn't pinpoint what it was. The afternoon seemed to be going well until Mrs. Cynthia called Lucas to the kitchen. "Lucas, I need to talk to you," she said in a tone he recognized as serious. Lucas followed his mother, feeling a knot in his stomach. "What's up?" "Your PlayStation. It's not in the living room anymore," she said, lowering her voice. "Are you sure you know where it is?" Lucas blinked, confused. "What do you mean? It was just there." "Well, it's not anymore," she insisted, glancing toward the living room. "And I think you know what that means." Lucas felt a wave of disbelief. "Mom, you can't seriously be suggesting that." "I'm not suggesting anything, Lucas. I'm saying we need to get to the bottom of this." The tension in the air was palpable. What had started as a fun afternoon was about to turn into something far more complicated. Lucas returned to the living room, trying to act normal, but his mind was in turmoil. His heart was racing, and he felt a knot in his stomach. Caleb was distracted, flipping through one of the books Lucas had left on the table, completely unaware of the tension brewing in the air. Lucas hesitated, unable to decide how to handle the situation. His mother's implicit accusation seemed absurd to him, yet he couldn't ignore her stern look. What was he supposed to do? "Is everything okay?" Caleb asked, looking up when he noticed Lucas was quieter than usual. Lucas swallowed hard. "Yeah, it's fine. It's just my mom being my mom, you know." He forced a smile, but he knew Caleb was good at sensing when something was off. Before his friend could ask more, Lucas quickly changed the subject. "Want to keep playing?" Caleb seemed to accept the change of topic and picked up the controller again. They played for a few more minutes, but for Lucas, the fun had lost some of its shine. His mind was split between wanting to protect Caleb from an unjust accusation and fearing a direct confrontation with his mother. Mrs. Cynthia rarely backed down when she was convinced of something, and Lucas knew it would be hard to persuade her that Caleb hadn't done anything wrong. When Caleb finally decided to leave, Lucas walked him to the door. "Thanks for the afternoon, Lucas. It was fun. We should do this more often," Caleb said with his characteristic smile. "For sure," Lucas replied, trying to sound natural. He watched as Caleb walked down the sidewalk and disappeared around the corner, feeling guilty for not saying anything about what was going on. As soon as Lucas closed the door, Mrs. Cynthia appeared in the living room, crossing her arms. "So, did you ask him about the PlayStation?" Lucas turned to face her, his anger starting to show. "Of course not, Mom. How could I ask something like that? He's my friend, and he didn't do anything." Mrs. Cynthia raised an eyebrow, as if disappointed. "Lucas, I understand you want to trust him, but you need to be realistic. Sometimes people aren't what they seem. And I'm not comfortable with the fact that the console disappeared right when he was here." "That's ridiculous," Lucas said, feeling his face flush. "You don't even know him, and you're already judging him. He wouldn't do something like that." "You don't know that," she countered, her tone cold and firm. "How long have you known him? A few months? That's not enough to really know someone." "You're saying this because he's different," Lucas blurted out without thinking. He realized the impact of his words the moment they left his mouth, but he didn't try to take them back. "You're judging Caleb because he doesn't look like the people you think are trustworthy." The silence that followed was suffocating. Mrs. Cynthia seemed stunned for a moment, but quickly regained her composure. "I'm saying this because I'm worried about you. My job is to protect you, even if you don't understand it now." Lucas shook his head in frustration. "Protect me from what, Mom? Caleb isn't a threat. He's my friend, and you're wrong about him. Without waiting for a response, Lucas climbed the stairs and locked himself in his room. He threw himself onto his bed, feeling a mix of anger, shame, and confusion. He knew his mother was wrong, but he also knew that confronting her directly wouldn't be enough to change her perspective. Deep down, Lucas wondered how Caleb would react if he knew what was happening. The next day at school, Lucas was restless. He avoided Caleb throughout the morning, unable to face the guilt he felt. When they finally crossed paths during the break, Caleb immediately noticed something was wrong. "Hey, are you okay?" Caleb asked, frowning. "You're acting different today." Lucas hesitated, but knew he couldn't hide it for long. "Caleb, I need to tell you something, but it's complicated." "Go ahead," Caleb said in a reassuring tone. Lucas took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "Yesterday, after you left, my mom noticed the PlayStation was missing. She thinks you might have taken it." Caleb's face remained expressionless for a moment, but there was something in his eyes, a mix of surprise and disappointment. "She thinks I stole your PlayStation?" "I don't think that," Lucas quickly said. "I know you wouldn't do that, but my mom, she's wrong, Caleb. I needed to tell you because I don't want this to come between us." Caleb was silent for a few moments, looking at Lucas as if trying to process everything. Then he let out a deep sigh. "Lucas, I didn't take your PlayStation, but thanks for telling me. It's good to know what's going on." Lucas nodded, feeling slightly relieved but still embarrassed. "I'm sorry about this. I wish things were different." "It's okay," Caleb said with a faint smile. "You trusted me enough to tell me, and that's what matters." But while Caleb seemed to handle the situation calmly, Lucas knew something had changed. He couldn't pretend everything was completely normal. Their friendship seemed to have been tainted by something Lucas didn't know how to fix. That night, Lucas lay awake for hours, trying to think of a way to resolve the situation. He knew he needed to do something to prove to his mother that Caleb was innocent, but he didn't know where to start. The only thing he was certain of was that he couldn't let doubt and prejudice win. Staring at the dark ceiling of his room, Lucas made a promise to himself. He would do everything he could to defend Caleb, no matter the cost. The tension between Lucas and Mrs. Cincha became palpable in the following days. Lucas avoided confronting her directly, but living at home was becoming increasingly difficult. She remained steadfast in her belief that Caleb had something to do with the disappearance of the PlayStation, while Lucas refused to entertain the idea. Every conversation felt like a battle, and Lucas began to sense that something much bigger was at stake than just a missing console. At school, Lucas tried to act normal, but the doubt planted by his mother still lingered in his mind. He trusted Caleb, but Mrs. Cincha's insinuations gnawed at him in a way he didn't want to admit. During lunch break, he found Caleb in their usual spot, reading one of the books Lucas had lent him. When Caleb saw him, he smiled, but Lucas noticed it wasn't as wide as usual. "Hey, Lucas, everything okay?" Caleb asked, closing the book and setting it aside. "Yeah, everything's fine," Lucas replied, though his voice sounded tense. He knew Caleb could sense it, but he didn't have the courage to bring up the issue again. Caleb tilted his head, studying his friend. "You're still thinking about it, aren't you?" "About the PlayStation." Lucas sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I wish this hadn't happened. My mom, she won't let go of this absurd idea, and I don't know how to convince her she's wrong." Caleb nodded slowly, as if he had already expected this response. "I know I didn't do it, and you know it too. That's what matters, right?" Lucas wanted to believe that was enough, but the reality was different. He knew that until there was a clear resolution, his mother's suspicion would continue to hang over Caleb, and that was something he couldn't accept. That afternoon, when Lucas returned home, he found Mrs. Cincha sitting on the couch with her phone in hand. She seemed pensive, as if debating something with herself. When she saw Lucas, she set the phone aside and crossed her arms. "Lucas, we need to talk," she began, her tone serious. "If it's about Caleb, I've already said everything I need to say," Lucas replied, crossing his arms as well. It's not just about him. It's about you, said Mrs. Cynthia, her voice laced with frustration. I don't understand why you're so determined to defend him, even with all the evidence against him. Evidence? Lucas almost laughed. Mom, you don't have any evidence. All you have are your assumptions. And do you know why you think that? Because he's different. Because he doesn't fit into your perfect little world. This has nothing to do with him being different, she retorted, though her voice wasn't as firm as before. I just want to protect you from getting hurt. Hurt how, Mom? Caleb has never done anything to hurt me. On the contrary, he's the best friend I've ever had. And you're trying to destroy that with your prejudices. Mrs. Cynthia opened her mouth to respond, but was interrupted by the sound of the doorbell. Lucas frowned, surprised. He wasn't expecting anyone. When he opened the door, he found Caleb standing there, holding a large bag in one hand. He looked calm, but there was a determined look in his eyes. Hey, Lucas. I know this is strange, but I needed to come, Caleb said, raising the bag. Can I come in? Lucas nodded, still unsure what was happening. He led Caleb to the living room, where Mrs. Cynthia watched them with a rigid expression. Caleb placed the bag on the table and opened it, revealing a brand-new PlayStation, still sealed in its packaging. I brought this for you, Caleb said, looking directly at Mrs. Cynthia. I know you think I took the old console, but I would never do that. In fact, I had planned to surprise Lucas. My dad got this model directly from the factory, and I wanted to give it to him as a gift. But I guess things got out of hand. The silence that followed was crushing. Lucas looked at the new console, then at Caleb, and finally at his mother. Mrs. Cynthia seemed lost, as if trying to process what had just happened. You think this solves everything, she finally said, her voice weaker than before. You're just trying to fix what you did, but... I'm not fixing anything because I didn't do anything wrong, Caleb interrupted, his voice firm but still gentle. I came here because I respect Lucas, and because I thought you deserved the truth. Lucas felt a wave of pride and shame simultaneously. Pride in Caleb's courage, and shame for letting his mother's doubts go this far. I'll leave you to talk, Caleb said, turning to Lucas. I hope this clears things up. He started to leave, but Lucas grabbed his arm. Caleb, wait. You don't have to go, Lucas said, but Caleb just smiled and shook his head. It's okay, Lucas. I trust you. After Caleb left, Lucas turned to his mother, holding the letter Caleb had left with the console. He opened it and began to read aloud. It was a simple message, but full of meaning, explaining the gift and reaffirming the friendship Caleb valued so much. When he finished, Lucas looked at Mrs. Cynthia with determined eyes. Mom, this is who Caleb is. Not what you think. And now you need to decide how you're going to deal with that. Mrs. Cynthia didn't respond immediately. Her face showed a mix of shame and stubbornness, as if she were battling something within herself. Lucas knew there was still much to resolve, but for the first time, he felt there was a chance for change. The impact of Caleb's visit reverberated throughout the house. The silence that followed his departure was unlike anything Lucas had ever experienced. Mrs. Cynthia remained seated on the couch for a long time, staring at the still-packaged PlayStation on the table. Lucas, on the other hand, stood nearby, watching her with a mix of frustration and expectation. He hoped something would change, that his mother would say something to show regret or even understanding. But she seemed stuck, trapped in a cycle of thoughts he couldn't reach. Mom, are you going to say something? Lucas finally broke the silence, his voice low but filled with emotion. He needed to hear something, anything, to start believing that Caleb's gesture hadn't been in vain. Mrs. Cynthia sighed, running her hand through her hair and avoiding his gaze. Lucas, I don't know what to say. I never imagined you would do something like that. But it doesn't change the fact that... Doesn't change what, Mom? Lucas interrupted, his patience finally wearing thin. Doesn't change that you were wrong? That you judged Caleb for no reason? Or do you still think he's hiding something? I don't know, she replied, her voice raised for the first time. I just want to protect you, Lucas. That's my job as your mother. Protect me from what? Lucas shot back, stepping closer. From people like Caleb? People who are better than us in so many ways. Because let me tell you something, Mom. He didn't have to do any of this. He didn't have to come back here. Didn't have to bring that PlayStation. Didn't have to write that letter. But he did. Do you know why? Because he's an incredible person, and you refuse to see that. Mrs. Cincha looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of surprise and guilt. Lucas, you're right, she said, her voice finally breaking. I was unfair. I judged Caleb, and maybe I did it for reasons I don't even fully understand. But it wasn't because I wanted to hurt you. I was scared. Scared of what, Mom? Lucas asked, his voice softer now. Scared of being wrong about the world. Scared of not being able to protect you from everything out there. Scared of realizing that I carry prejudices I didn't even know I had, she admitted, her words laden with vulnerability. Lucas felt his anger begin to dissipate, replaced by a deep emotional exhaustion. He sat next to his mother on the couch, saying nothing for a moment. Finally, he spoke. You don't have to be scared, Mom, but you do need to change, because I don't want to grow up believing those things. I want to be someone better. Mrs. Cincha nodded slowly, as if absorbing every word. I'll try, Lucas. I promise I'll try. The next morning, Lucas woke up with a sense of lightness he hadn't felt in days. He went downstairs to the kitchen and found his mother reading a book he'd never seen before. When she noticed him, she looked up and gave a small smile. I started reading about diversity, she said, as if to show she was taking her promise seriously. I don't know where to start, but I want to learn. Lucas felt an unexpected warmth in his chest. It wasn't enough to erase everything that had happened, but it was a start. At school, Caleb seemed to act as if nothing had happened. He greeted Lucas with the same calm smile as always, but Lucas knew the incident had left a mark. During their lunch break, he decided to address it. Caleb, I wanted to thank you for what you did yesterday, Lucas said as they sat on a bench near the soccer field. And I also wanted to apologize for everything. You don't need to apologize, Lucas, Caleb replied, shaking his head. I know it wasn't you, and honestly, I just wish things were different. It's not easy dealing with stuff like this, you know. I know, Lucas said quietly, but I promise I'll do whatever I can to make sure this doesn't happen again. Not just between us, but with anyone. Caleb smiled, but there was a weight in his eyes that Lucas couldn't ignore. I believe in you, Lucas, and that's why we're okay. When Lucas returned home that day, he found the old PlayStation in the back of the living room cabinet. It was buried under a pile of magazines that had likely fallen on top of it by accident. The discovery was a shock. He rushed to the kitchen, where his mother was washing dishes. Mom, I found the PlayStation, he said, holding the console in his hands. Mrs. Cincha turned, and her expression shifted from surprise to shame in seconds. Lucas, I don't even know what to say. You can start by apologizing to Caleb, Lucas said without hesitation. She nodded, drying her hands on her apron. You're right. He deserves that. I'll call his parents and ask them to bring him here. I need to make this right. That evening, Caleb returned to Lucas's house, accompanied by his father. Mrs. Cincha was visibly nervous but determined. Once they were all seated in the living room, she began, Caleb, I want to apologize. I was unfair to you, and there's no excuse for that. I judged you without reason, and I was completely wrong. I hope you can forgive me. Caleb looked at her for a moment before responding. I forgive you. It's not easy, but I think people can change. And I believe you're trying. Caleb's father, who had remained silent until then, finally spoke. I admire your courage in admitting that. It's a good first step. The evening ended with a lighter, yet meaningful conversation. Lucas felt that something had shifted, not just between his mother and Caleb, but within himself as well. He realized that sometimes facing prejudice and ignorance wasn't an easy battle, but it was one worth fighting. By the end of the day, as Lucas and Caleb played together on the new PlayStation. Mrs. Cincha watched them from the kitchen, a small smile on her face. She still had a lot to learn, but for the first time, she felt she was on the right path. The days following Mrs. Cincha's apology marked the beginning of a slow but significant change in the dynamic between Lucas, Caleb, and their families. Although Caleb had accepted Mrs. Cincha's apology with the same grace and calmness he demonstrated in everything, there was a certain reservation in his interactions with her. He had forgiven her, but Lucas knew that the scars left by that experience would not fade easily. At home, Mrs. Cincha seemed more reflective than ever. Lucas often saw her reading books and articles on topics he never would have imagined her seeking out on her own. She began watching lectures on diversity and prejudice, taking careful notes. Despite all the progress, Lucas knew his mother was still at the beginning of a long and challenging journey. At school, Lucas and Caleb returned to their usual routine, but their friendship felt stronger than ever. Lucas felt a renewed sense of responsibility to protect that friendship, not just for Caleb, but for everything it represented. He knew that their bond was a way to resist the prejudices that still surrounded them. One day during lunch break, Caleb approached Lucas with an unexpected invitation. "Lucas, I want you to come to my house on Saturday. My mom wants to meet you, and my dad thought it would be a good idea to." Lucas was surprised. Although he knew Caleb came from an influential family, he had never imagined meeting his parents so directly. "Really? Your mom wants to meet me?" he asked, hesitant. "Of course. I talk about you all the time, so it makes sense, doesn't it?" Caleb said with his usual calm smile. Lucas felt a wave of anxiety, but also excitement. He had always wanted to learn more about Caleb's life outside school, and this seemed like the perfect opportunity. "All right, I'll come," he replied, trying to hide his nerves. On Saturday, Lucas arrived at Caleb's house at the agreed time. He had never been in such an impressive home before. The facade was grand, but the interior was welcoming, with modern decor and personal touches like family photos and artwork scattered across the walls. Caleb greeted him with his usual smile and led him to the living room, where his parents were waiting. "Lucas, these are my parents," Caleb said, introducing them. "Mom, Dad, this is Lucas." Caleb's mother was a woman with a gentle voice and a warm gaze. She shook Lucas's hand firmly but unhurriedly, as if trying to convey something beyond a simple greeting. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Lucas. Caleb speaks so highly of your friendship, and we wanted to thank you for everything you've done for him." Caleb's father, a tall man with an imposing presence, also shook Lucas's hand. "Welcome, Lucas. Make yourself at home. Caleb has told us a lot about you, and we're already fans of your teamwork at school." Lucas was surprised by the warm reception. During lunch, the conversation was light and relaxed, but there were moments when Caleb's parents touched on deeper topics, such as the challenges Caleb faced simply for being who he was in a world that didn't always accept him. They spoke with pride and love, making it clear that Caleb was the center of their lives. After lunch, while Caleb showed Lucas his improvised art studio, he brought up something that left Lucas thoughtful. "My parents wanted to meet you because they think you're different, Lucas. In a good way. They know not everyone would have the courage to do what you did. Standing up to your own mom? Not everyone could do that." Lucas felt embarrassed, but also proud. "I just did what was right. I don't think it was anything that amazing." "It was," Caleb insisted, "because it's not just about me or you. It's about trying to change things, even if it's slow." When Lucas returned home that afternoon, still processing everything he had learned from the visit, he found Mrs. Cincha in the living room, flipping through another one of her books on inclusion. She seemed calmer than she had been in recent days, but there was still something in her expression that suggested she was struggling to reconcile her beliefs. "Lucas, how was Caleb's house?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "It was amazing," Lucas replied, sitting beside her. "His parents are incredible, too. They made me think a lot about everything that's happened." Mrs. Cincha closed the book and looked at him. "And what did you think?" I thought that sometimes things only change when someone has the courage to confront them. And even though it's hard, it's worth it, Lucas said, his voice firm. She nodded, and Lucas could tell his words had struck a chord. I know I still have a lot to learn, Lucas, but I want you to know that I'm trying. I know, Mom, and that means a lot to me, he said with a small smile. Later that night, while Lucas was in his room, he received a message from Caleb. Thanks for coming today. My parents love meeting you. I think we did something good together. Without even realizing it, Lucas read the message and smiled. He knew there was still much work to be done, both with his mother and within himself. But for the first time, he felt like he was on the right path. His friendship with Caleb wasn't just about fun and games. It was about learning to be better, facing the world with more courage, and, above all, changing what needed to be changed. That week, Lucas felt that something had profoundly shifted in his relationship with his mother. The atmosphere at home was lighter, almost as if the arguments about Caleb and the PlayStation incident belonged to another lifetime. Mrs. Cist seemed more open, more willing to listen, and, above all, more ready to acknowledge that she still had much to learn. Lucas, do you know what I realized today? She asked during breakfast, flipping absent-mindedly through the pages of a book on human relationships. I always thought I was doing the best for you by keeping everything under control. But I'm starting to think control isn't as important as I thought. Lucas furrowed his brow, curious. What do you mean, Mom? I never left room for other perspectives. I always believed that protecting you meant closing doors, but now I see it's the opposite. Sometimes protection comes from opening those doors and letting new things in. She explained sincerely. Lucas smiled faintly. It was rare to hear his mother admit her flaws, and it only reinforced the feeling that something meaningful was happening. I think that's a good start, Mom. Really? Later at school, Caleb noticed the difference in Lucas. You seem more relaxed today, he remarked as they played soccer during recess. My mom's changing, Lucas said, the relief in his voice impossible to hide. She's reading, trying to understand. I won't say everything's perfect, but it's a start. Caleb smiled. That's good. Small steps, remember? Every one of them counts. Even with the positive changes, Lucas knew challenges still lay ahead. His mother had begun to open up, but she still carried old habits and thoughts that sometimes slipped out in subtle comments or actions. He noticed this clearly when she suggested inviting Caleb and his parents over for dinner. Do you think they'd come? Mrs. Cist asked while setting the table for Sunday dinner. I'd like to get to know them better. I think it would be a good way to show Caleb and his parents that I'm trying. Lucas felt a mix of enthusiasm and nervousness. He knew Caleb and his family would accept the invitation, but he also knew the dinner would be a test for everyone involved. When Caleb and his parents arrived, the atmosphere in the house was charged with anticipation. Mrs. Cist greeted them with a genuine smile, though her movements betrayed a slight nervousness. Lucas watched everything attentively, hoping the evening would go smoothly. The conversation during dinner was polite and pleasant. Caleb's father, always eloquent, shared some of his career challenges and how learning to deal with prejudice had shaped his worldview. Prejudice is often subtle. It's not always a word or a gesture. Sometimes it's the absence of them, he said with remarkable calm. But I think that when we confront it with honesty, there's room for change. Mrs. Cist listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and occasionally sharing her own experiences. Lucas was surprised to hear her admit she had made mistakes, something he never thought he'd witness in such a formal setting. I was raised to believe the world was black and white, she said at one point. But I think real life is full of colors, and I'm just starting to see them. After dinner, Caleb and Lucas retreated to play video games, while the adults continued their conversation. Lucas glanced at Caleb and smiled. I was nervous, but I think it went well. My mom says she thinks your mom is genuine, Caleb replied with a shrug. And I think that's what matters. It's not perfect, but it's real. Later, as Caleb's family said their goodbyes, his father shook Mrs. Cist's hand and said, Thank you for having us. I think moments like this are important. They show we're all learning, and that should never stop. When the door closed, Lucas and Mrs. Cynthia stood in silence for a moment. Finally, she sighed and looked at him. I think it went well, didn't it? It was more than good, Lucas replied. It was necessary. That night, as Lucas prepared for bed, he received another message from Caleb. Your mom took a big step today. I'm proud of you and her. Lucas read the message and felt a wave of gratitude. He knew there was still much to be done, but moments like that showed him that change was possible. In the days that followed, Mrs. Cynthia seemed more at ease with herself. She started bringing up discussions about diversity and inclusion during her conversations with Lucas, as if eager to share what she was learning. Lucas, in turn, felt that his relationship with his mother was transforming into something more honest and profound. Despite all the difficulties, Lucas knew the dinner had been a milestone, not just for his mother but for himself as well. He realized that the changes that truly mattered were the ones that required effort, vulnerability, and, above all, courage. And as he thought about it, he realized that his friendship with Caleb had been the catalyst for everything. A friendship that, despite starting simply, had become a symbol of transformation and hope. It was a responsibility he was ready to embrace. In the days following the dinner, the changes in Mrs. Cynthia began to manifest in more visible ways. She not only continued reading about inclusion and diversity, but also started reflecting those lessons in her actions. Lucas noticed that, for the first time, his mother was genuinely listening, not just to him, but to the people around her. One morning, as Lucas ate breakfast before heading to school, Mrs. Cynthia joined him with a notebook in her hands. Lucas, I've been thinking about something, she began, her tone unfamiliar to him. It sounded confident yet hesitant. What is it, Mom? He asked, curious. I'm part of a mother's group in the community, and we've been organizing an event on family relationships. I thought about suggesting diversity and respect as the theme, but I wanted to know what you think before I propose it. Lucas was surprised. He never imagined his mother would take such an initiative. I think that's a great idea, Mom. Really, it's an important topic, and I think it will help a lot of people. Mrs. Cynthia smiled, visibly relieved. It's just an idea for now, but if it works out, maybe it'll be a good start to open more conversations about this. At school, Lucas shared the news with Caleb, who was equally surprised and impressed. Your mom is really putting in the effort, huh? Caleb said as he organized his books in his locker. That's big, Lucas. Really big. I know, Lucas replied, still processing the magnitude of what was happening. But at the same time, it feels fragile, you know? Like it could all fall apart with the smallest slip. That's how change starts, Caleb said with an encouraging smile. But the difference is, now you're there to support her. That makes all the difference. By the end of the week, Mrs. Cynthia's suggestion was accepted by the mothers group. She was tasked with organizing a talk on the topic, and her dedication was impressive. Lucas helped whenever he could, from suggesting videos and readings to reviewing the draft she wrote. It was a collaborative process that brought mother and son closer than ever before. On the day of the event, the community hall was packed. There was a mixed energy in the air, part curiosity, part skepticism, but also a sense of anticipation. Mrs. Cynthia stepped onto the stage, clearly nervous but determined. Lucas sat in the front row with Caleb by his side, watching her every move. Good afternoon, everyone, began Mrs. Cynthia, adjusting the microphone. Today, we're here to talk about something fundamental to our lives, respect and acceptance of differences. I must confess that, until recently, this wasn't a topic I understood or even considered important. But life has a curious way of teaching us lessons we never expected to learn. As she spoke, Lucas felt a lump form in his throat. His mother's words were sincere and filled with emotion. She shared how her limited perspective had been challenged by Lucas and Caleb's friendship, without revealing details that might expose Caleb directly. She spoke about the challenges of unlearning prejudice and how the experience had transformed her view of the world. When she finished, the audience applauded. Lucas noticed that some people were visibly moved, while others appeared thoughtful. The impact of his mother's speech was undeniable. As she stepped down from the stage, she found Lucas and Caleb waiting for her, both wearing proud smiles. "You were amazing, Mom," Lucas said as he hugged her. "Honestly, I couldn't be prouder." "Thank you, son," said Mrs. Cincha, her voice filled with gratitude. "I just hope this makes a difference." Caleb also congratulated her. "That was an excellent talk, Mrs. Cincha. I think a lot of people here will start thinking differently." Later that night, Lucas and Caleb were in his room playing video games when Caleb said something that stuck with him. "Your mom took a huge step today, but you know what's even more important? You gave her the chance to take it. Not everyone would have done that." Lucas shook his head, reflecting on Caleb's words. "I guess, deep down, I just wanted to believe she could change. And now, seeing it happen, I think it was worth it." At that moment, Lucas realized that the transformation he had longed for wasn't just about his mother. It was about himself, too. By standing up for Caleb, he had become stronger, more confident, and more determined to face whatever challenges life threw his way. The event was just the beginning. In the days and weeks that followed, Mrs. Cincha continued engaging in conversations and initiatives about diversity, often involving Lucas in her ideas. She knew the journey wouldn't be easy, but she was committed to continuing to learn. Meanwhile, Lucas and Caleb strengthened their friendship even more, knowing they had overcome something that could have torn them apart. They hadn't just survived the storm. They emerged from it more united than ever. That night, as Lucas lay in bed, he thought about how much had changed since the day Caleb came into his life. He knew there was still a lot to do, both at home and in the world around him. But for the first time, he felt he was on the right path. And for Lucas, that was enough. Over time, the changes that began as small steps became fundamental parts of Lucas and Mrs. Cincha's lives. His friendship with Caleb grew even stronger, transcending the barriers that had once threatened to tear them apart. For her part, Mrs. Cincha continued her journey of learning and transformation, now not just as a mother, but as someone committed to building a better world. A year after the incident that had sparked this transformation, the relationship between the two families was closer than ever. Lucas and Caleb were constant presences in each other's homes, and their families often shared moments together. For Mrs. Cincha, these gatherings were opportunities for growth, while for Lucas, they were reminders of how friendship and courage had changed their lives. On a sunny Sunday afternoon, Mrs. Cincha invited Caleb and his parents over for lunch. It was a special occasion because Lucas and Caleb had won a school science competition with a project they had developed together. The project, focused on sustainable energy, had taken first place at a state fair, and Mrs. Cincha wanted to celebrate their achievement. During lunch, the conversations flowed naturally. Caleb's father shared stories about the challenges of leading a large company, while Mrs. Cincha spoke about how her perspective had changed over the past year. "I never thought learning something new could be so liberating," she said with a genuine smile. "And part of that I owe to you, Caleb. You showed me that I was stuck in ideas that didn't make sense, and I'm very grateful for that." Caleb smiled but shifted the credit. "I think it was Lucas who really made the difference, Mrs. Cincha. He believed you could change, and that made all the difference." Lucas, savoring a slice of lemon pie, laughed. "All I did was believe in what was right. But honestly, Caleb, you've taught me far more than I could ever have taught you." The conversation continued, full of laughter and reflection, and as the sun began to set, everyone gathered in the living room for one last round of coffee and desserts. While the families talked, Lucas and Caleb decided to take a walk around the neighborhood, something they often did to enjoy the quiet streets and the freedom of being together. As they walked, Caleb stopped for a moment and looked at the horizon. "Have you ever thought about how all this started with something so simple?" he asked. "You mean the PlayStation?" Lucas laughed. "Yeah, it feels kind of surreal now. But it's not just that," Caleb continued. "It's about how we faced something that could have pulled us apart. And I think, in the end, it made us stronger." Lucas nodded. "You're right. And you know what's crazy? Looking back, I wouldn't change a thing. I think everything that happened brought us here. They walked in silence for a few minutes, enjoying each other's company. When they returned home, the families were beginning to say their goodbyes. Caleb and his parents thanked them for the invitation, and Mrs. Cinchel walked them to the door, smiling warmly. "Thank you for coming," she said, "and thank you for being so patient with me. I know I still have a lot to learn, but it's good to know I have you to help me along the way." "We're all learning, Mrs. Cincha," Caleb's father said, shaking her hand. "The important thing is to never stop trying." As the door closed, Lucas and Mrs. Cincha stood in silence for a moment, looking at the now empty room that still carried the energy of the special gathering. "You did something incredible today, Mom," Lucas said, breaking the silence. "And not just today. In everything that's changed since last year." She sighed and looked at him with a smile full of emotion. "I just hope I'm doing the right thing, Lucas. I want you to grow up in a better world than the one I knew." "You're helping build that world, Mom," Lucas replied, hugging her. "And that means everything to me." Later that night, Lucas received one last message from Caleb before going to sleep. "Today was special. Never forget how we started and how far we've come. You're a great friend, Lucas." He replied with a simple, "You too, Caleb." Always, feeling a deep gratitude for everything they had experienced together. As he turned off the lights and lay down, Lucas stared at the ceiling and thought about how much his life had changed. He knew there would still be challenges ahead, but he also knew he was ready to face them. His friendship with Caleb, his mother's transformation, and everything they had learned together were proof that real change was possible, even under the most difficult circumstances. And with that thought, Lucas fell asleep, knowing that the future was a place full of possibilities, built on the solid foundation of courage, friendship, and hope.